This last decade has been difficult for everyone. Saying any of this won't change how difficult this next decade will almost certainly be.
Breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight from 4 state governors as the coronavirus pandemic spreads.
On the day Canada crossed the threshold of 100 coronavirus cases, Ottawa was explicit for the first time about what researchers say.
Good evening. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone.
I think it's under control. I'll tell you what.
How? 1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is.
Hello, my name's Jack Valentine, and I, along with many other idiots, could not have possibly predicted that 1 month after I said what I did in my Games of the Decade video, we would see the world literally implode. I feel as though I may not be equipped to offer an idiom or topical reference that could accurately summarize the past 2 years in a way that is humorous or original, and this is an odd video for me by virtue of the fact that it's been, over a full year at this point since I made one. There are a few factors that are responsible for this. If I had to name them, I'm not sure what to tell you because I'm not mentally equipped to greet and comfort a time traveler or someone from an alternate dimension. During what now feels like a lifetime ago, what we'd come to think of as the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic in summer of 2020, I managed to make several videos in fairly rapid succession. I had planned several videos that I wanted to make over the course of 2020, one focusing on the best games of the year, one where I talked about shows I had watched to keep myself sane during lockdown and the first weeks of working remotely. I don't really have an excuse as to why these never got made. I used to take the time in the evenings after work to go for a walk on some trails near my house and would run through some scripting ideas or structures that might work. As soon as I would get home, the immeasurable dread of loneliness would set in. Being alone with my thoughts was miserable enough, and I suppose the idea of having to listen to myself speak aloud would really make me think I'd cracked. I should clarify that I'm actually fine. While that period was utterly miserable, I think I made out okay, all things considered. Anyway, here we are today, in the summer of 2022, and I should just take a moment to say I'm about to talk about some serious stuff for a minute. If you aren't ready for anything super heavy at the moment, I'll have a timestamp that you can jump to in order to get to the main part of the video. The world is quite literally on fire as temperatures soar across the globe. Republicans in America continue to work tirelessly to erode the rights of trans people and anyone who can get pregnant who might not want to, while Democrats sit in the corner saying the only solution is to vote even harder. The utter waste of oxygen who is the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, a man who somehow not only managed to have sex in the first place, but also went on to impregnate so many of his mistresses that his Wikipedia page doesn't know how to cite how many children he has, is resigning. It is nice until you think for long enough about whomever should replace him and realize they'll likely be even more evil. They'll be a Tory after all. There's an unjust war going on in the Ukraine, which it seems most world leaders would rather throw money and weapons at rather than try to advance diplomatic resolutions. The people of Palestine and occupied Gaza continue to live under the oppression of the fascist IDF and Israeli government in the largest open-air prison on the planet, where unlawful mass evictions take place on a daily basis. Last year saw an assault by the IDF on Al-Aqsa, one of the Palestinians' most holy sites during the Gaza ceasefire in the month of Ramadan. This year saw the broad daylight assassination of renowned Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, a far-reaching voice of advocacy for the rights of Palestinian people. The IDF would not 1 week later go on to assault the pallbearers and the mourning crowds at her funeral procession. The world, it would seem, is much the same as the last time I released a video. I'm sorry for the rather defeatist attitude. I did want to try and make something semi-fun, but I think I needed this for myself more than anything. A lot of things spinning around in the old dome on a day-to-day basis, and I feel like I need to get it out somewhere, so why not here, I suppose? This is a video about stuff I've played or watched over the past couple of years. There's going to be films, there's going to be shows, and there's going to be games. I suppose it could be a best of 2020/2021 video. There might be some 2022 stuff thrown in here for good measure, but a few things that are more fresh to me right now I have plans to make separate videos about. So without further ado, let's make the content. In 2020, there were a collection of fantastic games that narrowly skirted any dreaded pandemic delays. Animal Crossing New Horizons feels like a great place to start, as it was, for many, the game of the pandemic. For myself, it came out on the day that I started working remotely. It offered a miraculously kind and stress-free world to exist in while things seemed at their bleakest, while also managing to ape the capitalist dystopia we all live under. I think looking at the game now, 2 years and change on from its release, offers the best window into what New Horizons is. A good game, but not a very good Animal Crossing game. The true triumph of this game came from how broad its prospective audience really was. People I've known for years who never have touched a video game were trying to find Nintendo Switches so that they could get in on the craze. In the first 3 months or so, we'd organise hangouts on different people's islands to come and see what changes they'd made or cool design ideas they'd come up with. As time ticked on, people started to lose interest. This could be due to the fact that a fraction of normalcy began to return to the world, though I feel as though it has something to do with the limited changes that were brought to the game. The first few free updates added minimal changes, but were things that felt welcome at the time. It didn't take long to realise that most of these updates were all things that had just been in the last Animal Crossing game, New Leaf, on the Nintendo 3DS. By November of 2021, when the long-awaited 2.0 update arrived, long rumoured to be a game changer that would bring everyone back revitalised, it just felt like too little, too late. The paid expansion was okay to dip your toe into for a few minutes, but the slew of free updates were primarily things that had been absent from the base game release. This isn't to mention the seemingly massive lack of clear potential quality of life updates that players had been begging for. Things like altering the airport to not be a practically non-functioning mess and letting us, order more than one lmao ticket at a time. But I digress. I think the most glaring shortcoming of the game comes in the form of diverting from what made the Animal Crossing series special in the first place, plopping you down in an existing town where you could have fairly minimal impact, but allowing you to just live out a carefree existence there, surrounded by villagers with actual distinct personality traits. New Horizons seems more intent on being a game about designing neat spaces and having tools that break. If you're making a game and trying to figure out the balance of tools or items breaking in a sim-type game, don't. It's not fun. There's some design tips for free. It's impossible to dispute the massive impact the game has had, and I'm certain this will be a game to make a new subgenre of games similar to what happened in the wake of From Software games skyrocketing in popularity. I'm sure another similarity to that phenomenon will be that almost all of the games aping Animal Crossing just straight up won't be good. Switching things up a bit, let's talk about a show. In the spring of 2020, the conclusion of Nate Stephenson's She-Ra and the Princesses of Power aired on Netflix. For years, I'd seen cool folks post about this on timelines everywhere, talking about how the show was neat and making freak right-wing incels lose their minds in unison. One afternoon, I decided to throw it on in the background. 3 days later, I was choking up at an episode in the 3rd season. The show follows Adora, Katra, Bo, and Glimmer, along with an expanding cast of wonderful characters in a delightful coming-of-age story on a massive fantasy space opera stage with a beautiful gay love story at its center. Without saying too much, this is the kind of show that I wish that I'd had when I was a kid. Every episode has a lesson. Every episode wears its truth on its sleeve. It has a huge personality, phenomenal character arcs, both tragic and inspiring, and I could not talk about the show without mentioning its incredible, utterly unskippable intro sequence. Truly a fantastic show, and everyone needs to watch it. Oh, and also while we're on the topic of shows, somehow, as of summer of 2020, I had gone 27 years on the planet without ever having watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, don't ask me how, I'm honestly not really sure. Back in 2016, I watched all of The Legend of Korra and really liked it, and nearly everyone in my life was screaming at me to watch Avatar as well because it was even better. Well, after finally watching it, I can corroborate that it's great. When this was originally airing, I was living in France and basically had 0 TV channels, so I was only partially aware of it, but it definitely holds up today. Great show. Back to video games for a bit. Before talking about some of the best games of 2020, I'll throw out some honorable mentions. First of all, Persona 5 Royal, an absolutely outstanding video game that I talked about slightly more in depth in my Ghost of Tsushima review. It's been trapped on PlayStation 4 since released and is coming to everything in November, so play it. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is an interesting one because I haven't vibed with an AC game since, maybe the first one, but something about Valhalla really got me. It definitely had something to do with the arrival of the PlayStation 5, certainly. Far from feeling next gen though, it was truly a vast game. I will say the idea of making a game with literally no actual side quests while having at least half of the missions feel like ultra filler may not have been the smartest play. I think by the time I got to the ending, I'd clocked in 125 hours or something like that, and by that time, the sheer excess of what it offered had reared its head in a severely manufactured manner. Games with massive worlds and incredible scope should try to do more of what something like Red Dead Redemption 2 did. A game with a massive story that can be completed in under 50 hours if you do nothing else, but with enough mystery and wonder to pull you off the critical path for dozens of hours. Demon's Souls Remake. This was the reason I fancied myself a PlayStation 5 at release. Now, I consider myself a From Software, or more specifically a Hidetaki Miyazaki connoisseur at this point. I've played through all of the Dark Souls games several times, Bloodborne to completion about 4 times, acquired the Platinum Trophy in Sekiro Shadows Die twice, and most recently 100%ed Elden Ring. In my shame though, I must confess that I had never really played Demon's Souls, much less completed it. If I remember correctly, it was sometime in 2013 that it was added to the then fledgling catalogue of free games on PlayStation Plus for the PlayStation 3 system. Having only played about 10 hours of Dark Souls at that point in my life, I didn't make it much further than the tutorial level before setting it down and thinking I'd give it a go later on. Needless to say, that 7 whole years went by. Granted, most of those I was no longer the owner of the PlayStation 3 system. I had never watched any footage of it, so I still managed to go in unaware of what awaited me. Now, some time on, having actually very recently played the original game to completion, I completely understand what makes the remake so contentious. Everything is undoubtedly shinier and very expensive looking, especially running at a smooth 60 frames per second on a nice telly. Subtle changes to the controls and the smoothing of some splintered edges render it a pleasure to control and navigate. However, it is impossible to overstate just how much was lost in translation from the original. Some of the changes appear minuscule on the surface but have massive ramifications for the feel of the world. Things like the complete reinvention of the game world's architectural makeup alter the visual language and visual story of the world. What once may have instructed the idea of residents of a bleak world granted power by an unearthly malevolent force, informed through architecture designed by a people suddenly granted the means to create while still lacking the aspirations of pure opulence, is exchanged for what feels like an antiseptic world with vistas designed to belong in a fantasy video game rather than a world that is believed to exist by its creators. Alright, time to talk about some real video games. Final Fantasy VII Remake. This game rocks. If we had to hope for a modern Square Enix that is here to stay, it's the one that let Tetsuya Nomura work on this thing for 5 years and not compromise in his weird and wonderful vision at all. Because I'm so late to the party on this, I will echo something a far better writer than I said in his video review. Tim Rogers of Action Button wrote in his 3-hour, 18-minute and 56-second review that Final Fantasy VII Remake is not intended to be called Final Fantasy VII Remake, but in fact Final Fantasy VII Remake. He explained that upon reaching the final acts of the game, that its intentions are laid bare. The fact that no one can ever truly remake Final Fantasy VII. If you've yet to play the game, spoilers abound, obviously. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, similarly to the original, you play as Cloud, a former soldier for the evil mega corporation Shinra. The Shinra Corporation are destroying the planet by harvesting mako, a substance used as fuel. Cloud joins forces at first as only a paid mercenary with Avalanche, a group labeled as eco-terrorists, whose ultimate plan is to bring down the corporation. As an aside, I do think it's unironically hilarious that Square Enix is trying to get into NFTs now, especially ones themed around Final Fantasy VII. Not many companies have something so beloved and so glaringly contrary to their new modus operandi staring them in the face. Really staggering just how delusional corporations can be. Anyway, the remake of Final Fantasy VII was confirmed early on to not be a complete retelling. This game would only feature the Midgar chapter of the original, which is anywhere from about 4 to 8 hours depending on who you would ask. As a result, there's a natural start point to the game and an ending that anyone who played the original will be able to roughly predict. This is where things get interesting. For the first 20 to 30 hours, the game is an expanded and very expensive retelling of the original game. We get some chapters interspersed here and there that give us more time to hang out with Jessie, Wedge, and Biggs, for example, all of whom are delightful, as well as setting up new characters like Roche, who just shows up to do some sick stunts before leaving for the rest of the game. As early as chapter 2 of the game, after completing the prologue sequence in the Mako reactor, we start to see small changes that are hard to reckon with. Upon the fateful first meeting of Cloud and Aerith, the two are seemingly assailed by some kind of shapeless phantoms wearing black cloaks. These phantoms continue to intervene at different moments. When Barrett tells Cloud that his services won't be needed on the next mission, prompting Cloud to begin preparations to leave Midgar. Contrary to how things progress in the original, these phantoms appear, making Jessie slip and injure her leg, meaning Cloud is asked to rejoin the mission effort. Heck, there's even a moment in the final chapters of the game where Sephiroth straight up murders Barrett, only to have the phantoms perform some kind of resurrection ritual. Needless to say, there's a lot that feels as though the game is trying to do something of its own accord, a plan of its own that exists outside of the assumed expectations of longtime fans of the original game. Slowly, we realize their function to ensure that this story remains the same. These phantoms are in sort arbiters of fate. Their goal is to ensure that these characters reach their respective destinations. Cloud needs to be on the second mission in Midgar. Barrett needs to be there with Cloud after some pretty devastating stuff happens late in the original game. And of course, so that players can do the canonically correct thing and take neither Aerith nor Tifa on a date to the fair, but their best bud instead. We can by extension surmise that these phantoms are the physical embodiment of both fan expectations of what Final Fantasy VII Remake must be, as well as director Tetsuya Nomura's fears of straying from the trodden path. And so in the final chapter of the game, Aerith offers the party a choice. We can defy our predestined fates, break free from destiny's shackles, and forge a new story together. The party enters a portal to a new dimension, dawn breaking over Midgar behind them. In this ether world, we fight the arbiters of fate in a boss battle of such monstrous proportions, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around it. Once defeated, the path ahead becomes unclear. As Tim Rogers said, no one can remake Final Fantasy VII. A true final battle follows, pitting our party against the one-winged angel, Sephiroth, high above the ruins of a destroyed Midgar, amongst shattered earth, concrete debris, and battered metal. It's a spectacle of a scale that I don't think I've seen matched in some time. The game ends with our heroes setting out on a journey to conquer their fates and forge a new path. The timeline we thought we knew has been shattered. While it's undoubtedly divisive, I think that this is the perfect way to remake a game. Let the original stand on its own, take what was there and make something new. It's fantastic and was one of my favorite games of 2020. There was another game from 2020 that really felt like a knockout triumph, and as I started to write about it, I realized that I really owed it a video of its own, so check back later I suppose. I already have a ton written and should hopefully be done with that fairly soon. I have so many films noted down to talk about for 2021, but 2020 wasn't great for the film world, though I will give a huge shout out to Thomas Vinterberg's Another another round. It's a really fantastic story of longing for lost youth and a coming-of-age story simultaneously. Mads Mikkelsen is the lead and is impossibly good in it, so if you can find it streaming somewhere or whatever, give it a watch. Many of the films I was excited for that were known quantities for 2020 were delayed so early on into COVID, it's a miracle there was even a single good film to talk about, to be fair. Wow! I can't believe I thought I was going to get through 2 years in one video, especially considering that I had like 6 things to talk about here, and I'm still having trouble narrowing down the games I want to talk about for 2021, so I think we're gonna have to give this video the old young adult novel film adaptation circa 2010 treatment. Part 2 coming soon. I've been Jack Valentine. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.